I'm really happy to be here today presenting our work. So I will present a series of studies on combined X-ray absorption and X-ray powder diffraction to investigate the structure of a catalyst across different length scales, ranging from the local structure to a more longer range order. Before I continue into my presentation, I would like to first introduce the colleagues at our laboratory that have contributed to this work, and also our collaborators at other facilities. So I have selected a series of examples that are based on the thesis of former and current PhD students in our group, the Laboratory of Energy Science and Engineering, which is headed by Professor Christoph Müller, and I'm a scientist, as Jerry already introduced. And this work has been also done in collaboration with other groups at ETH and beamline scientists at the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility. So our group focuses in the context of achieving global sustainability, which is a key challenge. And we focus on developing materials and processes to close the carbon dioxide cycle. And for this, we need processes that allow us to capture the carbon dioxide at large emission sources, and processes that allow us to convert this carbon dioxide into value-added products, in this way producing sustainable fuels and chemicals. And in this conversion process, catalysis plays a key role. For example, the CO2 hydrogenation to methanol is an interesting process because it allows to convert carbon dioxide that reacts with hydrogen that can be produced via renewable sources into a liquid fuel, methanol. Another interesting process is the dry reforming of methane. In this reaction, carbon dioxide reacts with methane, producing syngas. And syngas can be further transformed into fuels, liquid fuels, via the Fischer-Tropsch process. But these processes rely heavily on the development of catalysts that are active, selective to us, our desired products, and also that they perform in a stable way under reaction conditions. And in order to improve our catalyst formulation and implement this process at the industrial level, we need to understand structure performance relationship. We need to understand how catalysts work and what are the different functionalities in these complex materials. So in this regard, multiprop techniques are extremely useful. And the reason is that catalysts are rather complex in nature. What I mean with complex is that they are composed by different phases. For instance, we have in the typical case an active phase, but also we have a support in which this active phase is stabilized. We have different kind of species, the presence of promoter, and there is also species that are spectators. But we need to understand what is the role of each of these species that are present in the catalyst, what is the role of in the catalysis. Another feature of catalyst is that the structure is typically dynamic, and we need to understand the structure of this material under the conditions at which this material works, under relevant catalytic conditions. And for this, X-ray absorption spectroscopy is a key technique because it allows us to study selectively the local environment, the geometry, and the electronic structure of our target element under relevant catalytic conditions. However, there are, of course, limitations of the techniques that in a sense, we cannot study a longer range order, or at least not directly investigate the longer range order. And we are also, let's say, blind to other species that may be interacting also with our materials. So in this sense, combining as much information as possible under the same condition is a very useful strategy to understand the different scales in catalysts. And in this sense, operando XAS XRD has been found to be a very useful tool. This is a photo of the setup that I will be using in the examples I will present today. This is our capillary reactor. Here it happened all the chemistry. So we feed this reactor with our gases, and we monitor the outlet of this reactor via either mass spectrometer or gas chromatograph. This is a setup that is available at the Swiss Norwegian beamlines, and we can acquire in an alternating fashion X-ray absorption spectroscopy, which, depending on the analysis, we will obtain the same or the XAS analysis, and at the same time, or in alternating fashion, the X-ray powder diffraction. So in this way, we obtain information about the crystalline structure, or in many cases, the nanocrystalline structure, the oxidation state, the local structure, and we can relate this with the simultaneously acquired catalytic activity. This is a broader picture of the Swiss Norwegian beamline, the M31 at the ESRF, which has been designed and constantly upgraded by these two scientists, Walter van Beek and Herman Emmerich. This is a schematic of the beamline. Basically, we have in the optical hatch, we have the two monochromators, one channel cut that allow us to have a very stable and reliable wavelength for the powder diffraction, and a tunable energy via this double crystal monochromator, and they can interchange in a fast fashion during an experiment. In the experimental hatch, we have, well, our typical XAS component, ion chambers here and here. We also have fluorescent detector somewhere here. This is a 2D area detector for powder diffraction. There is a high resolution detector here as well. And this device here down is our compact GC, compact gas chromatograph, that is brought by our group to the beamline to monitor. And this device allows us to quantify the reaction products in a relatively fast fashion, about 3 minutes. When we need faster acquisition time, in that case, we use a mass spectrometer. So going to the first example, I would like to describe operando XAS XRD studies on indium oxide catalyst for CO2 hydrogenation to methane. Indium oxide and indium oxide-based catalysts have been proposed for methanol synthesis via CO2 hydrogenation, and they have been found as very promising and superior as compared to industrial catalyst, copper, zinc oxide, and alumina. However, before the implementation of this catalyst at the industrial level, we need to further understand this material, what are the active phase, so there is a continuous investigation around this catalyst, reaction mechanism, as well as deactivation pathways. So we wanted to learn more about these materials, and we synthesized indium oxide nanocrystal with a well-defined structure. This is a big slide, cubic structure, with a relatively narrow distribution of size, about 7 nanometers. And we investigated what happened to this catalyst under CO2 hydrogenation conditions at 300 degrees and 20 bars by XAS XRD operando studies. So looking at the results, we can first look at the catalytic activity. Here, what I plot is the methanol yield as a function of time on strain. So what we can observe here is initially we have an activation stage, which is also a stabilization for the gases, which is followed by a stable performance in which methanol is relatively constant on time on stream. Unfortunately, this does not last very long, and it's followed by the activation state. Now, when we look at the SANES at the indium KH, so this was the catalytic activity monitored in the operando experiment, by the way. So the simultaneously acquired SANES shows that there is a decrease in the white line intensity and also a shift towards lower energies. The XAS analysis shows also there are strong changes occurring in the local environment. Both indium oxygen and indium sphere decrease in intensity here in the Fourier transform of the XAS data. And when we look at the powder diffraction, what we observe is that the indium oxide Bragg peaks decrease in intensity, and there is here a development of an amorphous halo. So we can extract a more quantitative analysis of each of these datasets and plot it against time on stream. So looking first to the SANES data, our first attempt was to analyze this data with linear combination fitting using the two references that we had available, indium oxide and indium metallic. However, the data was not well represented by only these two references. So there are no intermediate state reference available for indium oxide. So our first or second attempt to fit this data was using indium chloride as a reference of +2. And we observed that data indeed was better fitted, and this would suggest the presence of an intermediate state. But we were not convinced about indium chloride would represent well an intermediate state in an oxide due to the different ligand. Therefore, here we contacted Dragos, Stoyan at the ESRF, and he performed multi-curve resolution analysis in a blind manner, so without any information of available references, and he extracted 3 main components, which we later analyzed and assigned. So the initial component is indium oxide by comparison with our indium initial material, indium oxide. The third component, this blue one, is by comparison again with the metallic indium, can be assigned to a reduced metallic indium. And we assign this intermediate state to partially reduce indium oxide, which to compensate this charge must be rich in oxygen valencies. Now, looking at the XAS analysis, so we fitted our data with an indium oxide model initially, because it's the information we had from X-ray powder diffraction. The fit is initially good. And so we applied different model, and what we plotted here is the variation of the coordination number when we fix the bipolar factor. And we can see that this decrease both the indium oxygen and indium sphere decrease in coordination number towards the end of the reaction. However, at the end here, as you can see, I have also plotted the R factor. Our data is not so well explained by this model. So here at the last point, based on the SANES analysis, we incorporated a new sphere, indium sphere, to account for indium metallic. And at this point, I should mention that indium at this condition, indium metallic, is in a molten state. We perform also a reference, a control experiment on indium, only indium, and correlate these results. So just to show you the last fitting, improved considerably when, so this is the fitting at here at the last point, where we observe that indeed the fitting is improved with the incorporation of indium sphere, which is rather weak because it's mold. Now, looking at the analysis of the powder refraction data, what we can observe here is there are two kinds of peaks, as you see. There are these broad peaks are due to indium oxide X5 structure, and the sharp peaks here are boron nitrate that we use also to optimize the absorption of the sample to measure in transmission mode. Now, these sharp peaks can be used also as internal standard, and we can quantify the crystallinity of our indium oxide as a function of time on stream. So we can see that there is indeed a loss of crystallinity from about 50 minutes on time on stream, which decreases constantly. And this is in line also with the fact that, well, indium is metallic state is mold. So there is a reductive amorphization of this material. We can put all this information together now and try to give an overall picture of what's happening with this material under reaction. Initially, we have indium oxide and very slight changes in the initial stage. In the stable performance, we can see the presence of this intermediate state is more pronounced, and this partially reduced indium oxide is likely the most active state of the material, and this is in line also with previous studies that suggested that oxygen vacancies play a key role in the activation of hydrogen. Looking at the deactivation state, we can assign this deactivation to the presence of this molten phase, indium molten phase, that is not active for methanol synthesis or CO2 hydrogenation. Therefore, over-reduction leads to catalyst deactivation. So the question that we ask ourselves is, can we avoid this over-reduction, and how? So what we did is we deposited this indium oxide colloidal into different type of supports. And I'm going to focus here on in the case of indium oxide on monoclinic zirconia, because it gave the best performance as compared to other supports, not only stable performance, but also a higher catalytic activity. So we performed a similar operando study, and what we saw is initially, there is a decrease of the white line in the same spectra, but it stabilizes there and doesn't vary anymore. So we ascribe this to stabilization of the oxidation state in an intermediate state between +3 and +2. Now, when we look at the XA, you remember the indium oxide was decreasing both intensities in indium oxide and indium. This case was different. We observed an initial decrease in the first coordination sphere and a more pronounced decrease in the second coordination sphere. First coordination sphere stabilized very fast, in initial 10 to 15 minutes, and this drop also stabilized during reaction. In this case, powder refraction showed a relatively stable phase, which is monoclinic zirconia, and we could not distinguish between indium oxide and monoclinic zirconia due to the broad peaks. So this allows us to propose that this catalyst is evolving in the following fashion. So initially, we have well-defined indium oxide nanoparticles that will start to dissolve as ions into the structure of monoclinic zirconia during calcination, and furthermore during time on stream and the reaction condition. leading to highly dispersed indium sites onto the monoclinic zirconia, which are stable for over reduction, and they are highly active. So at this stage, I would like to ask if you have any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, there are a few questions. Got a lot of interest. To begin, Anatoly Frankel, would you ask your question, please?
I think Matthew Marcus was before me, but I can start. Thank you, Paula. Very interesting part. So maybe I misunderstand, but when you showed in situ data, Zane's and XAS data, they were all shown for the same reaction temperature, or from the beginning when you start to heat the sample up, you were collecting data, and this is what?
It's all isothermal, yes. It's all
okay, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
All right. There was a question about whether it's technically feasible and what the benefit would be to doing HRFD on the indium.
Doing what?
The high energy resolution fluorescence detection to try and sharpen the features. Is it possible at those energies, and would it be helpful if you could do it? Well,
I believe it would be very useful. I would actually like to do this. I think at these energies, at the K edge will be difficult. I'm not sure if it's possible, but should ask the beamline scientists. I know it's been done in molybdenum edge, but I don't know about, this is a bit high. This is 27 keV, so not sure. Or we could try with the L edge, which also should be more sensitive, I believe, to these changes. However, we could not operate probably at 20 bars. But I think it's very good question.
Okay, very good. Yang Ha, you have a question?
Yeah, so it's been very interesting to look at this non-transition metal like catalyst. I have done some calculations with some indium oxide catalyst, and it showed the homolumo gap, or the orbitals around the homolumo, mainly on the oxygen side. So the indium or germanium D manifold are buried like way down in energy. And in your case, you show that it's actually the indium that's getting involved in the redox reaction. So I wonder, like in this case, do you have to do anything to regenerate the activity of the catalyst every time you do a catalytic reaction, or the catalyst can just cycle for many rounds by themselves?
Well, so the once it deactivates, it is difficult to regenerate, because so we try to do this by flowing first CO2, and it recovers the oxidation state. But what happened is that it recrystallizes in a much larger crystalline. So this nanocrystal are not stable anymore.
So you can only, okay, so it's only like one turnaround instead of like a multiple cycles.
So for this case of this, the nanocrystal that are not supported. Now, in the case, so basically to stabilize this, we should use always a support. And it seems that in the case of monoclinic zirconia, at least we didn't see the activation. However, it should be tested in longer period. I know that the oxidation state is recovered when we flow air. So basically, but it doesn't lose activity for us, the catalyst that is supported. So it depends on which catalyst we're talking about. So in the case of nanocrystal that are not supported, we cannot regenerate.
Okay, thanks.
That's it. Thanks for the question.
Excellent. No more questions right now. You should continue.
Thank you. Okay, so now I move to the second reaction, the dry reforming of methane. And I would like to tell you about approaches to improve this type of catalyst. So the dry reforming of methane is a highly exothermic reaction, which means that we need to operate at a relatively high temperature in order to achieve high conversion. And this brings problems in terms of catalyst stability that deactivate mainly due to two reasons. One reason is the formation of coke due to the side reaction, methane decomposition into carbon and hydrogen, and carbon deposit on the surface of this metal and poison the catalyst. And the other, the activation route, that is also very important at this temperature, is due to sintering. So here the challenges are to produce coke-resistant, sintering-resistant, and reduce the noble metal loading in catalyst. So the first example I'd like to talk about is work we did some while ago, led by Sung and Kim. And here we investigated a series of nickel-based catalysts, nickel-iron-based catalysts. So we produced a series of nickel and nickel-iron alloy supported on metal oxide that was composed of magnesium and aluminum oxide. And what we observed, in line with also literature report, is that while nickel deactivates rather fast, when we add even a small amount of iron, we can stabilize the material. So the question for us was, through which mechanism is iron improving the catalyst stability? Here I show the TM of the spent catalyst, the nickel-based and the nickel-iron-based. So in the nickel-based catalyst, you can see there is a shell, a crystalline shell covering the particles. This is coke, this is graphitic coke. And this has led to the deactivation of this catalyst. On the other hand, we don't observe such a shell in the case of nickel-iron catalyst. So we wanted to learn more on how iron acts as preventing the formation of this graphitic coke. So again, we performed this XAS XRD operando study. In this case, we follow with an MS to confirm that the nickel catalyst and the nickel iron catalyst behave in the same manner as in the laboratory experiment. And they did. This is DMSC. So when we look at the nickel edge, in both catalysts, we have a rather stable spectra. On the other hand, when we look at the iron edge, in the iron-containing materials, we observe oxidation with time on stream. We can also quantify by linear combination fitting analysis the produced oxide, which in this case is FeO, and we can observe that the oxidation happens initially, and later it continues to increase. Now, looking at the XRD analysis, this is the nickel-based material. Most of these peaks are due to the support, except for these two that are due to the metallic phase, the nickel. But all these peaks are rather stable, except here that we observe the formation of a new phase, which is graphite. This is crystalline coke forming, which confirm that the deactivation of nickel-based catalyst occurred due to graphitic coke formation. On the other hand, in the nickel iron, we don't observe such formation. There can be, and there might probably be amorphous carbon formation, but we don't observe. And if we zoom closer here into the region of the nickel iron phase, so initially it's an alloy, we have confirmed this by XAS. This alloy, as we start to flow the dry refining of methane mixture, it de-alloys. So it shifted to right angles, to higher angles. in line with the formation of iron oxide. So iron oxide migrates out from the alloy. And this was also in line with the calculations from DFT of our collaborators that also suggested that iron at dry reforming of methane condition would migrate to the surface, forming this FeO type oxide. So now, well, we have observed that iron oxide is indeed present under reaction condition. But how this iron oxide can prevent the formation of carbon in our catalyst? So for this, we can look at several competing reactions here. So there is, from one side, carbon formation due to methane decomposition. We have also, we know that carbon dioxide is oxidizing our iron through this reaction. And we can, in principle, hypothesize that iron oxide reacts with carbon, leading to metallic iron and carbon monoxide. But this occurs all basically in parallel. And how can we decompose the contribution of these reactions? So what we did is we went back to the synchrotron. We performed again the experiment. We performed 5 hours time on stream. At this time, we know there should be some carbon formation, not crystalline, but amorphous. And so after the 5 hours, we stopped the reaction. We closed all the valves and flow an inert gas, helium. And if this reaction is true, our iron oxide should reduce to iron and produce carbon monoxide. And this is what we observe, indeed. So at the reaction condition, this is rather slow, so we increase further the temperature in order to accelerate this reaction. And at the end, and at the end of the reaction, we end up with, not the reaction, but the treatment in helium, we end up again with metallic iron as initial. Simultaneously acquired MS data show the formation of carbon monoxide in each of these reduction states. So pointing out to us this reaction. The next question was, so iron, how is iron now? Is it a different phase or is going back to the alloy? And for this, we looked at the XRD data. Here is the nickel peak, the FCC peak. So the blue line is the initial alloyed material. The black one is after this treatment here. And the red is again at the same temperature because otherwise we cannot compare. So after cooling down from 800, we form back the alloy. So under these conditions, it seems that indeed iron migrates back into the alloy, which led us to propose that under reaction condition, there is likely a dynamic alloying and de-alloying that helps removing the carbon that eventually form at the nickel rich sites. So the second example I'd like to talk about is on a noble metal catalyst. And here I would like to remind you that one of the goals is to reduce the metal loading, noble metal loading. And one way that has been proposed in literature is to use a reductive exsolution approach in order to obtain highly dispersed small nanoparticles onto metal oxide support. So we wanted to investigate a bit more this type of method. And for this, we use a support that is a Syria Samaria solid solution. and on which we dissolve ruthenium as ruthenium oxide, forming this samarium ruthenium cerium solid solution. So our support, this is the powder diffraction of the support and the ruthenium incorporated solid solution. And so although the main Bragg peaks are the same, we can observe some difference here in the these small peaks that relate to the oxygen superlattice, meaning that the oxygen vacancies are ordered in our support and disordered when we incorporate ruthenium. So showing this order-disorder phase transition, so we can confirm that is indeed incorporation of ruthenium in the structure, which is important for the method. So we wanted to follow how this reaction occurs during the reductive treatment to the formation of these small nanoparticles. So we follow this with ruthenium KH and powder diffraction. And what we observe is when we analyze this data is that the reduction proceeds via an intermediate state, which we call ruthenium delta plus. We don't know exactly which is the oxidation state of this material, but it's an intermediate state. And after this state, there is the formation of ruthenium metallic around 300 degrees already, which grows in intensity up to 700 degrees. The powder refraction shows a disordered order phase transition here with ordering of the oxygen vacancies. And probably this plays a role in the exsolution of ruthenium out from the structure. The XAS, here we only look qualitatively because it's done at different temperature. This is ramping. But what we can see qualitatively is that, well, initially our material has only first coordination sphere, no second sphere. This is probably due to the highly distorted environment. And as we reduce, we observe the formation of this ruthenium sphere of ruthenium metal. And this is the TM image of the final material, where you can see small nanoparticles of the order of 1 or 2 nanometers dispersed on this ruthenium samarium support. I don't have time to show you the catalytic results, but these materials turn out to be highly stable under even 100 hours on time of stream. Questions on this part of the...
Yes, Lou Toscani, you had a question?
Yes, congratulations, it's amazing all the work. I have a question on when you propose the mechanism for dealloying in nickel iron. Is it possible that the reverse water gas shift is taking place, and that is why you are seeing more carbon monoxide on the exit?
Well, the reverse water gas shift takes certainly place together with the dry reforming of methane. In the case of this control experiment under helium, well, there is only an inert gas, so the only oxidizing species that we have in our system is only FeO. But you are right that under dry reforming condition, the reverse water gas shift is one competing reaction, and normally we see a higher CO to hydrogen ratio in these conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Albert Gili, you have a question? Oh, his microphone's not working. Okay, the question is, have you compared the crystallite size of the nickel versus nickel iron before and after the reaction? Could sintering be responsible for deactivation instead of carbon formation? And mentions you have carbon in both catalysts after catalysis as evidenced by the TEM.
Well, this is a very good point because there is an interconnection, an interrelationship between the size of the nanoparticle that could play a role. So we did a lot of effort in order to produce materials with relatively constant particle size, and judging from the peak width of the operando study, we don't see much of a crystal growth. However, I do agree with the importance of taking this into consideration. I think we have discussed this in the paper. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Okay, you should go ahead and continue, please.
Very good. So this leads me to the end of my talk, and here I would like to propose some perspective, also in terms of combined operando techniques. So the data I have shown you have been mainly analyzed in the XRD data, have been analyzed in reciprocal space, right? But when we are dealing with the small nanoparticles, 1 to 3 nanometers, powder diffraction is challenging to analyze, and we cannot get detailed information in this case, basically due to 2 reasons. One is the presence of diffuse scattering. The small nanoparticles are rather disordered in many cases, and also due to the small particle size, which leads to this broadening of the Bragg peaks. So one way of go further into this analysis is to use the pair distribution function analysis, which require high energy and high Q, high to theta angles. And with this, we can analyze data, powder diffraction data in real space, allowing us to analyze not only the Bragg contribution, but also the diffuse scattering. And here is an example. This is ex situ data on how XAS and PDF can provide a complementary technique to understand the structure of small nanoparticles. These are gallium oxide nanoparticles that are very disordered by nature. And in this case, I'm plotting here the SAMEs, which can give us a key information about the local coordination. Here we have gallium in tetrahedral and octahedral coordination in different ratios depending on the treatment, and this treatment leads to different phases, but also different ratio between these octahedral and tetrahedral sites. And this is the corresponding PDF data, where we can investigate the local structure, the intermediate range structure, and the long range structure. So this method will, or combining these 2 methods, allows us to bridge this gap between the very local 1 to 5 Armstrong structure with this middle range structure in the range of 1 to 2 nanometers, which is not really accessible by powder diffraction. And for this, we are working in the development of setup at the Swiss Vision Beamline that includes high efficient detector for high energy, because the combination of high energy and efficient 2D detector can provide good quality data. Ideally, we will combine these 2 techniques in the same setup under the same operating conditions. So I hope I have shown you how XAS and XRD combined in the same setup can provide a complementary information about the interplay between the local and average structure, and that these techniques are rather useful for understanding the atomic scale structure, in this case for CO2 valorization reactions. Finally, I would like to acknowledge ETH Zurich, so our founding, SNF, the Swiss National Founding Foundation, SCOPEM, which is our microscope center, the Swiss Norwegian Beamline, the ESRF, all our participants from LESE Group, and also EPFL for now taking part into the Swiss Norwegian Beamline. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. It's a terrific talk. People should keep typing in their questions. To begin, Wajdi Alnoush, you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Paula, for the great presentation. I was just wondering about the reactor you were using, the reactor design. You showed the setup. Would you use the same reactor if you want to do studies on reactions requiring higher temperatures, more than 500, 600? I know sometimes the windows has to change, things like that.
So basically we can reach something like 800 degrees. But yeah, so the heat distribution, we start to have problems of heat distribution at such high temperatures. So ideally, there is also some development at the Swiss Norwegian Beamline to have a more closed setup, but at the same time that allows to collect a wide angle for the powder diffraction data. So yeah, so there are developments, and so far we can reach 800 degrees. So the window is actually a capillary, is a quartz cell, so that wouldn't change much. But basically, the isolation of the heat can be improved.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. So you've talked about patching together the different experimental methods to be able to go from very short length scales out to longer length scales, bridging from nearest neighbor structure out to more like nanoparticle structure. But all of the methods you're talking about are still bulk averaging. So there's a lot of exciting work going on spectrotachography right now, either for your systems in particular or more generally. When I say, should you be doing spectrotachography on catalysis, what comes to mind for you, comparing and contrasting with the kind of work that you're doing?
Well, I think it can give us the spatial resolution that we don't have, basically, as you are pointing out. I think there are some developments at ESRF and also at PSI, and yeah, probably also different synchrotron to basically improve the resolution and really go to the small nanoscale that we need. So I think it depends on the catalyst, and we may need to maybe go to larger particles to maybe apply this technique. I don't know if you can see 2-3 nanometers, but yeah, certainly it will give the dimension that we are not getting in this study.